everyone. Welcome to Chapter 3 of the Take 10 curriculum. Today we're going to be talking about fair and assertive behavior and how it relates to social justice. But first, as always, let's review our last video. So in the last video, we talked about how values are what we think are important and good in life, and principles are a specific kind of value relating to our beliefs about right and wrong, and they're kind of like the rules or guidelines by which we live our lives. And we also talked about the third Take 10 principle: disagreements and arguments are normal and to be expected. All right, so now let's get started with Chapter 3 on fair and assertive behavior. So first, we're going to watch a video of Dr. Martin Luther King's speech from the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963. Some of you might have seen this speech before, but this time I want you to think about a few things. What's one thing you learned this time around that you didn't know about the speech before? And what different responses to racial injustice does MLK address, and which does he advocate for? All right, so I'm going to play the speech in full, but if you're short on time, go ahead and pull up the video on YouTube and just watch from 11 minutes and 20 seconds until the end. That's the famous I Have a Dream section. And you can follow along with the speech. The words of the speech are in your activity packets. All right, so here we go.
The pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulation. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities. Knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last."
It chills every time. All right, so now let's talk about the video. So as a whole group or just with a partner, let's give you about 10 minutes to talk through these questions. What was Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream? What stands in the way of his dream back then and today? And how did he and others try to resolve this conflict between his dream and reality? Okay, so let's focus on this third question here. There was a conflict between his dream of racial equality and unity on the one hand, and the reality of inequality and division on the other. Now, how did MLK and the other leaders of the civil rights movement try to make that dream a reality? Well, let's first talk about what they didn't do. What they didn't do was just sit back and watch injustice happen and hope for a better future. That would be a passive response to conflict, simply giving in, ignoring it, not addressing it, or letting people walk all over you, essentially. They also didn't fight violence with violence. That would be an aggressive response. This could involve physical violence or psychological violence, like yelling at someone or insulting them when they do something that you feel hurt by. Instead, Martin Luther King talks about again and again about meeting physical force with soul force, what he calls soul force. Now, this is the key point here. What is soul force? So turn and talk with a partner for about 30 seconds and try to answer that question. What comes to mind when you think of soul force? So I think part of what it means is being assertive. Being assertive means standing up for yourself while being fair to others and claiming your rights without violating other people's rights. It's important to note how just because you're not being aggressive doesn't mean that you're being passive. Soul force is still force, but it's peaceful force. It's force that tries to bring justice and unity rather than revenge or further violence. Take 10 encourages you to use these kinds of assertive responses to conflict as much as possible. And much of the rest of the videos in this curriculum are going to talk about assertive strategies for conflict resolution. But for now, just think back to that movie that you watched as the challenge for this lesson. Did the characters act passively, aggressively, or assertively? And what was the outcome? Did it work out in their favor while they were acting passively or aggressively? Probably not, right? So what I want you to do now is take a moment to silently reflect on this question of what issues in your school or community matter to you and why. So take a little bit to reflect and think to yourself, and then I want you to take about 4 minutes to brainstorm a list of issues with your class or with the group of people that you're watching the video with. So now it's important to note that maybe some of the issues on the board that you just wrote down, you don't know much about, or don't really care about, or maybe you even disagree that they're problems. However, it's important to recognize that even though you might not feel the same way, everyone has a right to feel however they feel. Which brings us to our fourth Take 10 principle. So remember way back in the first video, we talked about all the different emotions that people are capable of, and there's a bunch. But it's important when you're trying to form a violence-free community to allow everyone to express the full range of their emotions. Now remember that this doesn't mean we can express ourselves however we want. Remember, we can't express our anger through violence. We can express it in other healthier ways. But for the most part, we should allow everyone the right to express themselves however they need to do. Okay, so now back to our list of issues. For the last activity today, I want you all to write your own I have a dream statement. But I also want you to take that one step further, because it would be passive to simply state your dream. Like Martin Luther King Jr. and all the people who were at that march, they didn't just go to that march, state their dreams, state their demands, and then do nothing about it. They acted on that. So you are going to have to take action. So what is your dream for your school or community, and what is one thing that you will do to make your dream a reality? So I want you to write that down in the next 5 minutes and actually carry that out after this video is over. So what have we learned today? We learned that passive responses ignore, avoid, or don't resolve conflicts. And aggressive responses to conflict use violence in any form and often result in further violence. Assertive responses are soul force. They claim your rights without harming others. They seek to resolve conflicts, but do so peacefully. And we also learned Take 10 principle number 4, every person has a right to feel however they feel. So that's it for today. Next time, we're going to be talking more about feelings, especially about controlling your anger. And your challenge for next lesson is to hold your breath and recite the words to your favorite song from memory. See how far into the song you can get while still holding your breath. All right, so that's your challenge. See you next time.